Her message read, "I'll be at Jake's tonight, accept it or leave." My reply was simple, "Consider me gone." I never thought those would be the words that would end my 2-year relationship, but sometimes life forces your hand when you least expect it. I'm Nathan, 31, work as a database administrator for a logistics company in downtown Chicago, and up until 3 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out with Chloe, my girlfriend of nearly 2 years who I'd been living with in my loft apartment. She was this vibrant freelance graphic designer, all creativity and energy, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make it feel more alive. When we first started dating, I was genuinely impressed by her ambition and drive. She had this portfolio of small business clients and was always talking about expanding her brand, building something meaningful. The early months were incredible, filled with late-night conversations about our dreams, weekend trips to art galleries, and this sense that we were building something real together. When she suggested moving in together after 8 months, it felt natural, like the next logical step for two people who were serious about their future. My downtown loft was perfect for both of us: open layout, great natural light for her design work, walking distance to most of her client meetings, and the $3,200 monthly rent was something I could handle comfortably on my salary. The only hiccup came during the lease renewal process when Chloe's credit issues prevented her from being added as an official tenant, leaving me solely responsible for the lease agreement. She seemed embarrassed about it, promising it was temporary and that she'd get her finances sorted out soon, so I didn't push the issue. I figured couples work through these kinds of challenges together, and her irregular income as a freelancer made perfect sense for why her credit might be less than stellar. Looking back, that was probably the first real warning sign, but I was too optimistic to recognize it. Chloe had this way of making financial discussions feel petty and unromantic, like I was being controlling for wanting clarity about our shared responsibilities. She'd contribute what she could when she could, usually covering groceries 1 week and utilities the next, but there was never any real system or consistency to it. I told myself that love wasn't about keeping score, that partnerships weren't always perfectly balanced, and that her creative career would eventually stabilize. What I didn't realize was that I was already being tested, that she was measuring exactly how much she could get away with before I'd push back. The apartment that was supposed to represent our shared future was slowly becoming my financial burden and her free accommodation, but I was too invested in the relationship to see the pattern forming. Chloe had also started taking on this major project with a client named Jake, a small business owner who was apparently launching some kind of consulting firm and needed complete branding overhaul. She talked about him constantly, how innovative his ideas were, how much potential his business had, how refreshing it was to work with someone who really understood the value of good design. I was genuinely happy for her professional success and encouraged her to put her best work into the project, thinking it could lead to more high-paying clients and help stabilize her income. I had no idea that Jake was about to become the catalyst for everything falling apart, or that Chloe was already beginning to view our relationship as something to be managed rather than cherished. Over the next 8 months, I watched our financial arrangement shift from something that felt temporary and fair to something that left me feeling like a walking ATM with benefits. Chloe's contributions dropped from roughly half of our shared expenses to barely 30%, while her personal spending seemed to increase dramatically, new clothes appearing in her closet weekly, expensive skincare products filling our bathroom counter, designer coffee dates that she'd document obsessively on Instagram. She developed this habit of mentioning money stress right before rent was due, sighing dramatically about how freelance work was so unpredictable, how clients were slow to pay, how she was waiting on this big payment from Jake that would solve everything. I found myself covering not just the rent and utilities, but groceries, streaming subscriptions, her phone bill when she claimed to be short, even her car insurance when she had what she called a cash flow emergency. The Jake project seemed to consume more of her time and attention each week, with Chloe working late frequently and often returning home after midnight with vague explanations about creative breakthroughs and extended strategy sessions. She'd come home energized in a way I rarely saw anymore when we spent evenings together, talking animatedly about Jake's vision and his plans for expansion, how he really understood her creative process unlike some of her other clients. I started noticing that household responsibilities fell entirely to me, I was doing all the cleaning, taking out trash, handling maintenance issues with the landlord, even grocery shopping because Chloe was always too busy with work to help with mundane tasks. When I suggested we create a chore schedule or discuss a more formal arrangement for expenses, she'd get defensive and accuse me of treating our relationship like a business transaction. "I thought you loved me for who I am, not what I contribute to your spreadsheet," she'd say, making me feel guilty for wanting basic partnership responsibilities. The real wake-up call came when my friend Marcus mentioned seeing Chloe and Jake at this upscale coffee shop downtown during what was supposed to be a work meeting. He said they looked pretty cozy for a professional relationship, laughing and touching hands across the table. When I brought it up casually that evening, asking how the meeting with Jake went, Chloe's entire demeanor changed instantly. "Why are you asking? Did someone say something to you? I can't believe you're having people spy on me now." The defensiveness was so immediate and intense that it confirmed what I'd been trying to ignore. Something was definitely happening that went beyond professional collaboration. I tried to explain that Marcus had just mentioned seeing them, not that I'd asked him to watch her, but Chloe turned it into an argument about trust and control. "This is exactly why Jake says most people don't understand creative partnerships," she snapped, which felt like a punch to the gut. She was discussing our relationship problems with this guy. The power dynamic in our apartment had shifted completely without me realizing it, and I was walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid to ask legitimate questions about our shared life because any concern I raised was immediately labeled as jealousy or control. Chloe's behavior became increasingly brazen over the following months, testing boundaries I hadn't even realized existed until she crossed them. She started having what she called inspiration nights, where she'd disappear until the early morning hours, claiming she needed to drive around the city or sit in 24-hour diners to let her creative energy flow naturally. "Real artists don't work 9-to-5 schedules, Nathan," she'd explain when I expressed concern about her safety or asked for basic communication about her whereabouts. These spontaneous creative sessions always seemed to coincide with her work on Jake's project, and she'd return home with this glow of excitement that I used to think was about me but now clearly came from somewhere else entirely. I tried multiple times to formalize our living arrangement, suggesting we revisit the lease situation now that she'd been here over a year, but there was always an excuse. Her credit was still recovering, she was waiting for a big payment to come through, the lease renewal timing wasn't right, she didn't want to deal with bureaucratic paperwork when things were going so well between us. The irony wasn't lost on me that she could commit to overnight creative sessions with Jake but couldn't commit to legal responsibility for the apartment where she lived rent-free. I started keeping track of our expenses in a simple spreadsheet, not to be petty but because I was genuinely curious about the actual numbers behind what felt like a growing imbalance. The reality was staggering. I was covering roughly 75% of our shared costs while Chloe contributed barely 25%, and that was only when she remembered or felt like it. Meanwhile, she was spending freely on herself, buying expensive art supplies she claimed were business investments, treating herself to spa days when she was stressed about deadlines, even booking weekend trips to nearby cities for what she called creative retreats that I was never invited to join. The apartment that was supposed to be our shared space had become my financial prison and her free hotel with benefits, complete with a roommate who handled all the boring adult responsibilities while she focused on her passion projects. Whenever I tried to address the growing resentment I felt, Chloe would immediately flip the script and make herself the victim of my unrealistic expectations. "I never asked you to take care of me," she'd say, which was technically true but completely ignored the fact that she'd structured her entire lifestyle around my financial support. "If you can't handle dating someone with an irregular income, maybe you should find yourself a boring accountant who splits every bill down to the penny." She had this way of making reasonable requests for partnerships sound like personality flaws on my part, as if wanting basic fairness meant I was fundamentally incompatible with creative, free-spirited people. The worst part was how she'd use our relationship as leverage whenever I pushed back too hard on anything, subtle threats about maybe needing to reevaluate what we both want if I was going to keep being controlling about money and schedules. She knew I loved her and was invested in our future together, and she wielded that knowledge like a weapon to shut down any conversation that might require her to actually contribute equally or take responsibility for her choices. The breaking point came during the most important week of my career so far. I was leading a major presentation for our company's biggest client, a project that could determine my promotion prospects for the next 2 years. I'd been working 12-hour days preparing data analysis and coordinating with multiple departments, the kind of high-pressure situation where having a supportive partner at home makes all the difference in the world. Tuesday evening, Chloe announced she'd be staying late for a creative intensive session with Jake and wouldn't be home until after midnight, maybe later if they really got into the flow. This is the breakthrough moment for his entire brand identity, she explained, packing an overnight bag like she was going on a weekend trip instead of a work meeting. Sometimes you have to strike when inspiration hits, even if the timing isn't perfect. I tried to explain that I was stressed about my presentation and could really use her support that week, but she brushed off my concerns with a wave of her hand. Nathan, your job is stable and predictable. This is my chance to create something truly innovative with someone who appreciates my vision. When she still wasn't home by 1 a.m., I started getting genuinely worried. Chicago isn't the safest city late at night, and Chloe wasn't answering her phone or responding to my increasingly concerned texts. I called 3 local hospitals, checked police incident reports online, even drove around the neighborhoods where Jake's office was located, imagining car accidents or worse. At 1:23 a.m., just as I was about to call her parents in Milwaukee, my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. Staying at Jake's tonight for early morning brainstorming session. Deal with it or find someone else. The casual cruelty of that message hit me like a physical blow, not just the implied intimacy of spending the night at another man's place, but the complete dismissal of my worry and the ultimatum delivered like I was some annoying obligation she was tired of managing. Deal with it or find someone else. After 2 years of subsidizing her lifestyle, supporting her dreams, and getting nothing but attitude in return for basic partnership expectations. I stared at that message for probably 10 minutes, reading it over and over, feeling something shift inside me that I'd never experienced before. It wasn't anger or hurt or jealousy, it was clarity, pure and simple, about exactly what I meant to her and what I was worth in this relationship. I typed and deleted probably 5 different responses, everything from angry paragraphs about respect and boundaries to desperate pleas for her to come home and explain what was happening between us. Finally, I settled on 4 words that felt like the most honest thing I'd said in months. Consider me gone. I hit send at 1:31 a.m. and immediately felt this strange sense of peace, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. For the first time since moving in together, I wasn't making excuses for her behavior or trying to rationalize why someone who claimed to love me would treat me like a disposable convenience. I spent that night dismantling our shared life with a level of strategic precision that surprised even me, fueled by 2 years of suppressed frustration that had crystallized into ruthless efficiency. First, I called my landlord's emergency line and explained that I needed to modify the lease immediately due to a relationship ending. Since Chloe was never officially added as a tenant, removing her was simply a matter of confirming she'd no longer be residing there. By 3 a.m., I had scheduled lock changes for first thing in the morning and arranged for all utilities to be transferred to my name only, cutting off her access to the apartment and everything that came with it. I methodically went through every shared account we had, streaming services, grocery delivery apps, even the parking pass for the building garage, removing her access and changing passwords while documenting everything for my own records. The joint checking account we'd opened for shared expenses got closed online, with the remaining $340 transferred to my personal account along with detailed screenshots of every transaction showing exactly how one-sided our financial arrangement had become. I packed all of Chloe's belongings into boxes with the same systematic approach I used for database organization, taking photos of everything for documentation purposes and creating a detailed inventory list. Her expensive art supplies, designer clothes, the skincare products that cost more than my monthly gym membership, everything went into carefully labeled boxes that I stacked in the living room like evidence of a life that was about to disappear. I even found receipts and bank statements that confirmed what I'd suspected: she'd been spending money on expensive dinners and shopping trips while claiming to be broke, funding a lifestyle that my financial support made possible. By dawn, I had loaded my essential belongings into my car and was driving to my brother Mike's place across town, where I'd arranged to stay temporarily while I found a new apartment. The efficiency of my exit strategy shocked me. Years of being the responsible one, the planner, the person who handled all the logistics while Chloe focused on her creative pursuits, had prepared me for exactly this moment without me realizing it. I left a single note on the kitchen counter next to her boxed belongings. Your things are packed and ready for pickup. You have 72 hours to arrange collection before I donate everything to charity. Don't contact me. Mike was waiting for me with coffee and genuine concern, having seen enough of Chloe's behavior over the past year to understand why I'd reached my breaking point. I was wondering when you'd finally stop being her personal ATM, he said as we unloaded my car. She's been using you, man, and everyone could see it except you. When Chloe returned to the apartment later that morning, probably expecting to find me waiting with apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness, she instead discovered that her supposed doormat had called her bluff in the most devastating way possible, by removing himself completely from the equation and leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. Chloe's attempts to regain control of the situation escalated from angry texts to full-scale manipulation campaigns that revealed just how desperate her actual circumstances were. My phone exploded with messages throughout that first day, everything from furious demands that I let her back into our apartment to tearful voice messages about how I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. You can't just throw away 2 years over one night, she sobbed into my voicemail. Jake and I were working, nothing happened, you're being completely irrational about a professional relationship. When I didn't respond to her direct appeals, she started enlisting friends and family members as intermediaries, none of whom had the full story of our financial arrangement or her increasingly brazen behavior. Her sister called me, saying Chloe was devastated and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel over a work meeting, begging me to at least talk to her and work things out like adults. My own mother even got a call from Chloe, painting herself as the confused girlfriend whose boyfriend had suddenly snapped and kicked her out without explanation. The manipulation campaign reached its peak when Chloe showed up at my brother's building with Jake in tow, apparently thinking that bringing him along would somehow prove their relationship was purely professional. I watched from Mike's window as they stood in the lobby arguing with the doorman, Jake looking increasingly uncomfortable as Chloe gestured dramatically and pointed toward the elevators. When I finally came down to face them, the carefully constructed lies immediately fell apart under the most basic questioning. So Jake, what time did this work session start last night? I asked calmly, while Chloe shot him warning looks. And what time did it end? I'm just curious about the timeline since Chloe never came home. Jake shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing he'd been dragged into something messier than he'd bargained for. Look man, we worked until maybe 11, then we just hung out and talked about business stuff. She said you guys were having problems and she needed space to think. The timeline didn't match Chloe's story, and his admission that she'd been discussing our relationship problems with him confirmed everything I'd suspected about their inappropriate boundary crossing. Problems? I repeated, looking directly at Chloe. What kind of problems were you telling him about? Her face went red as she realized Jake had just exposed her lies about the nature of their evening together. It's not what you think, she stammered, but Jake was already backing away from the confrontation, mumbling about needing to get back to work and leaving Chloe to face the consequences of her manipulation alone. My calm responses to her hysteria revealed the depth of her financial dependence and complete lack of genuine remorse. She wasn't sorry for betraying our relationship, she was panicked about losing her free ride and stable living situation. Despite weeks of increasingly desperate contact attempts that ranged from promises to repay every penny I'd spent on her to vague threats about self-harm if I didn't take her back, I maintained complete no-contact boundaries with a resolve that surprised everyone who knew me. Chloe tried everything in the manipulation playbook, showing up at my office building, sending flowers to Mike's apartment with notes about how she'd learned her lesson, even creating fake social media accounts to get around the blocks I'd put in place. Her messages evolved from angry demands to pathetic bargaining. I'll get a real job and pay you back everything, I'll sign whatever lease agreement you want, I'll delete Jake's number and never speak to him again. The desperation was almost pitiful, but I recognized it for what it really was, panic about losing financial security, not genuine love or remorse for her behavior. Through mutual friends, I learned the reality of Chloe's situation without her carefully crafted victim narrative. She'd been evicted from 2 temporary living arrangements when friends got tired of her not contributing to expenses. Jake had completely cut contact after his own girlfriend found out about their inappropriate relationship, and she'd lost most of her Chicago clients due to her unreliable behavior and unprofessional conduct. Within 6 weeks, she'd been forced to move back in with her parents in suburban Milwaukee, a devastating blow to someone who'd spent years crafting an image as a successful independent creative professional. Meanwhile, I secured a modern 1-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, finally able to afford the upgrades I'd always wanted without subsidizing someone else's lifestyle: hardwood floors, updated kitchen, even a dedicated home office space for the side consulting work I'd never had time to pursue while managing Chloe's constant drama. My promotion came through 3 months later, partly due to the successful presentation I'd given during that crucial week when everything fell apart, and my new salary made me realize just how much financial stress I'd been carrying without acknowledging it. The most satisfying revelation came through my friend Marcus, who reported that Chloe was still telling people I'd abandoned her over a misunderstanding, proving she remained completely incapable of taking responsibility for her choices or acknowledging the pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation that had defined our relationship. My new life, free from walking on eggshells and constantly worrying about someone else's mood swings and financial emergencies, confirmed that choosing self-respect over a toxic relationship was the best decision I'd ever made, even when it meant starting over at 31 and admitting I'd wasted 2 years on someone who saw me as a resource rather than a partner.